What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for watching. My name is Savannah. If you're new here, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am excited to say that we are back in River Rock Zoo with this one. And again, if you're new here, this is Planet Zoo, and River Rock Zoo is kind of the project that started it all for me here on YouTube. So very excited to be back in this project. And actually was something that I started a really long time ago. This is actually a habitat that I started when I was given early access to the aquatic DLC that came out a couple months ago, or a few months ago now. As we're just on the doorstep of the Southeast Asian Animal Pack, here I am finishing up something from the aquatic DLC. It just goes to show you how many projects I have going on at one time and kind of how slow I am with getting things finished up and put out for you guys. But excited to release this nonetheless. Now, what you'll notice first and foremost is that this first part of the enclosure doesn't look anything like the final thumbnail. It doesn't look anything like the end cinematics or anything like that, because I ended up changing not the layout but the style and those little upside down triangle pieces. I ended up changing those out for something very different, and the overall style of the build gets changed quite a bit. However, I wanted to leave this in, one, because I do a lot of the overall layout design in this, where we're obviously creating a circular habitat here, and that stays throughout the whole enclosure, but also because I do a lot of the work in the beginning that does get taken away. Just kind of goes to show you guys that I don't get everything first try. Not everything gets laid down super easy peasy, you know, first try and it stays. I do go back and I do fix things. So I still get those comments of, how do you create these things so quickly? How do you create them so well? And it honestly is just practice. It's trial and error. And I want to encourage you guys to trial and error yourself. Try things out. If you hate it, there's a delete button. If you end up liking it, there's an undo button, a redo button. You can create different things, move them aside, build something else, see what works. I'm an incredibly visual person, and I have to actually see something laid out in front of me for me to decide if I actually am gonna like it or not. Most of my habitats start with kind of an idea in my head, but I work a lot off of reference pictures because I am such a visual person and I need to be able to see it. But even still, if I'm just using something as inspiration and not directly recreating something, I don't actually know if I really like it until I actually build the whole thing and see it out, or add plants because I generally hate everything until I add plants and rocks and foliage. Speaking of plants and rocks and foliage, there are a ton of rocks in this build, and this was the first habitat that I started, like I mentioned. Actually, I mentioned that I started it with the early release or the early access of the aquatic pack, but I forgot to mention that this was actually the very first habitat I sat down to make. When I got early access for that pack, I thought that adding gray seals to the River Rock Zoo was going to be my first habitat build that I released. But as I got kind of halfway through it, a little bit further along than we are here, I decided that I didn't like it quite as much, or I kind of lost inspiration. I don't remember quite what stopped me, but I ended up releasing the other gray seal habitat that you might have been able to catch on the channel with the backdrop of the little kind of fishing buildings and things like that. So kind of went in a different direction, but still wanted to complete this habitat because I still do think that gray seals belong in River Rock Zoo, so I'm excited to have it finished. We did actually finish the last part of this in stream, so you will notice at the very end of the video the quality does go down quite a bit because I had to download my stream off of YouTube because the wonderful content creator that I am forgot to hit the record button, but this is the last stream that I've forgotten to record, so from here on out I'm on it and I've been recording what I've been streaming. But anyway, what I was talking about is, as the first building for the aquatic pack for me, this was when these flexi-colored rocks were brand new. Brand new to me, never used them before. They were obviously brand new to the game, so I went a little overboard. So when I say there's lots of rocks, there's a lot of rocks in this build, because I loved using them. I loved the texture. I loved that they were multicolored, or not multicolored, flexi-colored, and I was just excited to have them in the game. So that's why there's kind of so many rocks in there, and we do an underwater viewing area because diving mechanics were new. All this stuff that kind of seems, now that I think about it, like a staple in the game, really was brand new when I was building this habitat because it had just come out with the aquatic pack. So it's funny for me to think about that sitting here as at the time you're seeing this, the Southeast Asian animal pack comes out tomorrow on the 30th. And so it's kind of funny to look back that just about 3 months ago, this was all kind of revolutionary to us, revolutionary to the game, you know, diving, semi-aquatic animals, things like that. So if you did see the stream or are a fan of Tully Zoo, our franchise zoo that we have going on right now, you'll recognize these shade structures that I'm making here. I actually originally made them for this enclosure first, and then I liked them so much, I saved them as a blueprint. I brought them over to Tully Zoo. I did modify them just a little bit for Tully Zoo, but this is where they originated from. So if you do recognize them, you're not seeing things, you're not wrong. That's where they actually originally came from. So to talk about these cute little chunky guys, so this is again a gray seal habitat. I find the gray seals super cute, and I know I call everything cute, but I find them super, super adorable. There we go, that's another word, adorable. Maybe I'll start saying adorable instead of cute. People give me a hard time on my streams for calling everything cute, but I do find everything cute. I'm an animal person, what can I say? But anyways, seals actually have a lot of different adaptations to fit their kind of aquatic lifestyle. Now, I did mention in my previous seal build that they are semi-aquatic because they do go on land, they do live in the water, so they're not completely aquatic, but their limbs are actually their flippers. So they're short, but they do have digits that are encased in cartilage and connective tissue that kind of form those flippers, so they're nice and strong. That way they are really efficient swimmers. They can kind of navigate in the water really, really well. And on those flippers, they do actually have claws that help them kind of navigate on land. So although they are clumsy on land, they are able to transition from water to land, you know, relatively easily. They're not going to win any marathons or sprints on land, but they are going to be able to get around just fine. When you compare them to sea lions, seals generally have bulkier torsos, particularly due to their method of swimming propulsion. Seals use their rear flippers and move the back half of their bodies in their swimming motion. So if you see them, they kind of go back and forth like a little S shape, and they do this in game where they open up one end, one side of their flipper and close it, and then one side of their flipper and close it, and alternate on either side and kind of swim through the water. I think Frontier did a really good job at getting that animation correct, because that is kind of what they look like in the wild as they're swimming. But the contrast to that is that sea lions actually mainly use their front flippers for swimming, whereas seals use their back flippers for swimming. So I thought that was just kind of interesting, right? I just mentioned I'm an animal person, so I can't go a video without giving you guys a few animal facts. And I mentioned their chunkiness earlier, but that is actually on purpose. So a layer of blubber or fat insulates the seal body, and that's what gives them their chunky little round sausage type appearance. And the seal's circulation system can shunt the blood supply to the extremities, which basically just means it cuts it off to its outer extremities, like its flippers and its fins in the back. I guess they're still flippers, they're not really fins. And to the outer surface of its body, and this helps keep its core body temperature warmer if it's not having to send its blood all the way out into the end of its flippers. If you can imagine, it's the same kind of thing with us. When we start to get cold, our our fingers, our toes, our nose, things that like stick off of our body get cold. And it's because the blood vessels are more exposed to or closer to our skin, and it dissipates the heat easier. We lose heat through things like our hands, our arms, our legs, our feet, things that are away from the outer parts of our body. The only difference is the seals can cut off that blood supply to their flippers, and that means they can keep the blood in the core of their body more so and keep it nice and warm, so prevent it from going out into those fins and losing heat. And this really helps them because they do live in a colder climate, right? They live kind of up north where it's cold, and especially in the water, it's definitely cold as they're swimming around. So it's a really, really useful and really cool adaptation that they have to have in order to survive in the environment that they survive in. And the last little fact I want to leave you with is how we can help these species. There's a way to help any species out there in the wild, and it's pretty simple, and a lot of the times it's same from species to species. But for these guys, the main ways that you can help would be to reduce, reuse, recycle, and it's always said in that order because that is the order of importance. Reducing the amount of plastic, the waste, and everything that you create or use is the most important form of kind of helping out the environment in those three different things. Reusing things would be the second best. If you do have to buy them, reuse them so that they're not a single use and then into the trash. And then at the very least, if you don't have a reusable use for something, to recycle it and make sure that it does get recycled so that it can be reused in something else. Now, not 100% of things that are recycled do actually make it into recycled products, which is why it is the most important in order to reduce your use of those things rather than to just rely on recycling them. But that will help these guys as well because they are ocean dwelling species, and reduce, reusing, and recycle definitely helps out our oceans. You want to protect local waterways by using fewer pesticides when caring for your garden or lawn, because remembering those pesticides that you put on your garden or lawn, when it rains, all that runoff that inevitably ends up in the ocean. So you want to make sure that we are not using anything dangerous on our gardens or our lawns, because then we don't want it to make it out to the oceans. And then lastly, what you might not think of right off the bat would be never to release balloons up into the sky. Animals often mistake them for food or become entangled in their strings, and that can be really dangerous for these little guys. You know, they're not very graceful on land. They don't get around too well, and especially in the water, if they're not able to swim, then they're not going to be able to outswim their natural predators like sharks or orcas, and that can leave them threatened, in danger. So these guys are listed as least concerned on the IUCN Red List, but it doesn't mean that they don't deserve protecting and some help as well. So that was my last little fun fact for you guys. I'm a huge advocate for conservation, so just wanted to make sure to kind of squeeze that in there, let you know what we can do to help out the world. But back to the build. So we are almost done here, and as I was building, I decided that I wanted to add a little dock here for them because the sleeping beds were new, or not sleeping beds. Those pallet looking things are actually the bedding for the seals. They recognize them as a bed and they'll go take a little nap on them. So that was brand new. Wanted to use those in there. Again, this being the very first build I ever attempted with the new aquatic pack, I was just kind of trying to use everything that came with it, all the new stuff that came. So lots of flexi-colored rocks and those bedding, those pallets. Additionally, when I first had the pack, I hadn't figured out yet that the gray seals, and any animal for that matter, needed the depth of their swimming area to be greater than 4 meters. So you see now that I have lowered down the floor to their little swimming area, and that's because when I originally made it, I didn't know that they were going to need something quite so deep. So I ended up having to extend that down and make it a little bit deeper. That way they will actually do their diving animations in this habitat. So I do end up putting a little fish feeder, that dead fish, spitter thing on the bottom so that the fish come out and the little seals do go down and swim. But I still thought it looked a little bit plain with just the solid walls and the rocks and things like that. So here I'm making some fake seaweed. Now in game they are real plants. They're found in the little nature tab, but we are pretending for the sake of the build that this is like fake plastic seaweed that the zoo would have put in. There's a really really cool exhibit at the San Diego Zoo in their Africa Rock section. It's got leopard sharks and African penguins in it, and they have some fake seaweed in the back, and it just makes it look a little bit more alive, adds a little bit of color to it so that it's not just rocks and solid walls. So pretty happy with how this comes out. You can see just repeating those up and spinning them all around. I forget what this little plant is called, I apologize, but just kind of rotating it so it doesn't look super repetitive, and making some taller and some shorter, and that way they kind of all go along with, or they all look correct rather. The next thing that I'm gonna move on to, and I haven't done it just yet, is the outside of the habitat. Now, I put this off for the very end because I really didn't know what I was gonna do. I knew I wanted some sort of structure on the outside that the guests would walk under to kind of make them feel more incorporated into the habitat, you know, like you're kind of walking into the seal's space, even though that's not really possible, right? Because they're kind of walking up to the underwater viewing area, and they're not gonna be able to go underwater with the seals. But just trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I end up using a mud pillar and using the circular rotation or circular symmetry in the game to make, and it's not really, I call it a shade structure. It doesn't really offer a lot of shade. It's basically just a decorative kind of, what is the word? Like, not like a pergola, not like a lattice, but just something that you walk underneath, I guess. It's purely just decorative, really, because like I said, it doesn't really offer any shade. We get started on it just here. But yeah, it's just decorative. It's just something to add a little bit of interest. I did cut out the first part because I was attempting to make this without using the mud pillar trick, and I was just gonna kind of freehand it and eyeball it, but it ended up being way more trouble than it was worth. And I was doing this, like I said, on stream, and I asked chat, or apologized to chat rather. I said, I know we just spent like 10 minutes on this, but it's not symmetrical. It's not looking right. Let me go back. Let me do it the right way. We're not going to take any shortcuts. So I ended up going back and doing it like you're seeing now. So I did actually cut that part out, but mostly just because it was tedious. It was a lot of the camera getting really close to the pieces and trying to make sure that they were, you know, lining up properly and the right spacing and all that kind of stuff. And when I sped it up, it kind of made me dizzy, so I was afraid of making you guys dizzy. So I went ahead and cut that out. But you can see here, just kind of creating that circular pattern is really easy using that mud pillar. Just making sure that everything kind of fits and everything fills in those gaps, making sure that it's all rotating on the right axis so it's all level and it's nice and pretty. But just, I mean, you guys have seen me do this before, this kind of repetitive beams that go across just as interest. I actually just really like it because it casts cool shadows on the ground, and I think it adds interest to things like screenshots and just the atmosphere of when you're walking through. I actually just finished on working on a second project that you'll hopefully see later this week. I'm aiming for maybe Thursday or Wednesday, maybe. I don't want to do it on Friday because you'll get an episode of Tolly Zoo on Friday, because I will not be late, I promise. Tolly Zoo is coming out on Friday. But anyway, I use this same kind of technique where I just kind of repeat those boards over and over again at varying widths or varying lengths apart. And it, like you can see here, it just puts a shadow on the ground and creates a little bit of interest of what you're looking at. It's a really simple, easy way to make things look a little bit more interesting than they actually are. And this, when it was all said and done, is fairly simple to do once I decided to do it, you know, correctly and not try to shortcut it and put it together real quick. Then just adding some concrete pillars to the very bottom of it to make it look like it's actually planted in something. Not planted, secured, I guess is a better word because it's not a plant. But make sure it looks like it's secured to something, and then putting those same pillars on the inside, because if it was wood and it was sitting in salt water, it would deteriorate really quickly. So we put those concrete pillars on the inside to make it look like the concrete goes all the way up above the surface of the water level, and the wood won't rot and deteriorate, so that way the structure stays nice and strong and it doesn't collapse. Then from here on out, it's really just scenery and decorating that awful ramp that I made up to the upper viewing part. I really didn't want to use stairs. I wanted it to be accessible for everybody. So if you're in a wheelchair or walking or crutches or whatever you might have, you're capable of getting up to the upper viewing area. But I also didn't want to make it the steep, like 45-degree angle that is just the default of when you make an upward slope without stairs in the game. So I spent a lot of time just making it kind of a gradual thing, but I didn't do it in a very like back and forth crisscross like pattern, or what is that called? Serpentine? Switchback. I didn't do it in a switchback pattern. I did it kind of back and forth and then out and back, and yeah, it was kind of a mess. So I actually cut that part out at the very end. I kind of finished that up off camera because it was just a lot of rock placing, and it was really, really repetitive because it was just, like I said, it was just placing a ton of rocks until that whole structure over there looked supported. It came out looking pretty good, very simple, very easy, because it's just a pathing with some railing on it. I didn't do too much to it, but making sure that it looks supported was important, obviously, because we wanted to make sure our path isn't just floating. But pulling foliage from elsewhere in the zoo just to try to make everything look cohesive. This is a temperate kind of North American zoo, so using a lot of those temperate trees, the pine trees, the evergreen trees that are used throughout the entire park, it just kind of keeps the whole theme together. But yeah, so with that, I'm gonna leave you guys with the end cinematics. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did enjoy, please do remember, leave a like, hit subscribe if you want to see more. With the DLC coming out tomorrow, there will be plenty of Planet Zoo content, so you can get your fill of that. And I really hope to see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much. Bye.